הקומפיוטר. ואני צריך לעשות pause. Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome. This meeting is the, I would say, second part of the critique we had in the AAP 2021 exhibition. I should say that I got really extremely positive comments about the critique, the first part of the critique, and I had some exhibitors saying it's the best critique they ever had or have seen. So I think we should congratulate all of our jury members for their work and for their important comments which they made. And the second part is a presentation by Colin Fraser about title and title pages. So Colin, over to you.
Okay, let me share the screen. Hang on 1 second. Okay, Yoram, does that come through?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Good morning, everybody. And this is, as Yoram said, is kind of the second half of, or second part of the critique that we had last Sunday. One of the aspects which the jury felt strongly about was that many of the title and synopsis pages that we received did not fully benefit the exhibitors. They were not to their best. And also, in many cases, we had problems with the actual title that was submitted for the exhibit. And it was thought that maybe it would be helpful for the exhibitors from the show and for others to have a presentation talking and focusing on both the question of an exhibit title, the choice of a title, and also the creation of a title page. Now, this talk is similar to one which I gave in Sharjah in UAE in, I think, November of 2019, before COVID. So it seems like a long time ago, and it really has been a long time. But hopefully this will be of some help to exhibitors in preparing and enhancing their exhibits. So let's address the question, first of all, why is the title important? Why does it matter what you call your exhibit? Well, there are really four aspects to this that are important. Firstly, it alerts the judge as to what exactly you will be putting forward in your exhibit. And also, to be fair, it creates an impression of the exhibit in the judge's mind. I mean, most of us are always very quick to jump to conclusions. And the title of an exhibit is very much going to create an impression in the judge's mind. The other aspects are that the title will also encourage the judge to understand what the scope of the exhibit is. Is it going to be a fairly broadly based synoptic exhibit covering a fairly extensive period or extensive geographical area? Or is it going to be fairly narrow, focused, and deep? The last aspect to why the title is important is really probably the most important. And that is that you want the title to encourage the judge to look more carefully at your exhibit and with greater interest. You want to make him stop and look rather than just move forward without the fullest attention being focused on your exhibit. Now, obviously, all of you are familiar with the different exhibit classes. And this morning or this afternoon, I'm primarily going to focus on the, should we call them the more traditional aspects of postal history, traditional philately, postal stationery, and so on. Most of the comments apply similarly to thematics, social philately, and also to postcard and banknote exhibits, although I'm not really going to talk specifically about those. Now, talking about both the Abraham Accords exhibition that we just judged and some of the other recent shows, both virtual and prior to COVID, those that took place in person, most often the problems of title exist with postal history exhibits. Now, some of you may agree or disagree with that comment, but in general, the postal history exhibits and the titles lead to the most confusion. And here are just a selection of different titles for postal history exhibits that have been used recently. Some of the exhibits have been very successful and others less so in achieving high medals. Some of them will also be familiar to you from this recent AAPE exhibition. Now, if you look at these titles, they're all rather broad, vague, and not really very specific about what exactly is going to be shown. For example, if you took Southern Mail, unless you actually knew that this related to the American Civil War and Confederate postal history, you would have absolutely no idea what that title represented. Similarly, if we take the Aden postal history, is it going to address the early Indian post offices? Is it going to address the British military activities in Aden post-World War II? Is it going to address censorship during the First and Second World War? We have no idea. If you also look at domestic and international China mail, is this going to address large dragons, small dragons, post-cultural revolution? We have no idea the scope of the exhibit. One exhibit from Israel that was shown some years ago, stages in the development of maritime mail. Again, we have absolutely no idea the geographical coverage, the time period, or anything that this exhibit embraces. Now, whilst the postal history exhibits are ones with some of the greater issues, the problems are not just confined to the postal history exhibits. Here are some titles for exhibits in other categories. Now, if we look down the list, again, some will be familiar to you from the AAPE exhibition and others from recent international and national shows. If we take Egyptian postal stationery, again, we have no idea of the time period. We have no idea of the scope. Is it all aspects of postal stationery? Certain types of postal stationery? We don't know. Essays and proofs of the stamps of Mexico. What period is covered? What exactly is the scope and content? Probably one of the vaguest of all is to simply say classic Germany. Does this mean Germany after the formation of Germany in the 1870s? Does it relate to what we would normally think of as classic Germany, the German states? We have no idea. First stamps of Europe, similarly, a very vague, unspecific, and unhelpful title. Now, in certain cases, titles can be ambiguous. Here is one which an exhibit of the UNTEA, which is the United Nations Temporary Executive Authority in Indonesia. And the exhibit has been shown under both uses of the UNTA overprint issues and postal history of UNTA. Now, one might think of these as being the same, synonymous, but they're not. They each imply a very different scope, as you can see from the slide. Now, summarizing where we've got to in this presentation so far, in all the cases that I've talked about, the scope, the content, and the details of the exhibit are really unclear. Now, as a consequence, the judges have no idea what to expect. And as a result, it's very hard for them to prepare to analyze and to judge the exhibit to best advantage. So this choice of title can really work against the exhibitor. Now, there are really three aspects that help to make for a clear title of an exhibit. First of all, clarification of the geographical scope of the exhibit. Secondly, the time period covered by the exhibit. Thirdly, the philatelic characteristics of the exhibit. Now that sounds kind of a wishy-washy term, but hopefully it will fall into place and become clearer as we progress. To reiterate, the key thing, a clear title gives the judge a sense of what the exhibit is about, where it exists in geographic space and time, and the title should also directly relate to the scope of the exhibit. Now, when we talk about geographical scope, this is not necessarily just a country name. It could be a geographical unit, a political unit, or a national entity. And just on the slide, there are some different examples of what this could mean in practice. And the ones that I've shown include both relating to the Arabian Gulf and UAE, also to Palestine and Israel, and also to the United States, paying tribute to the three countries of the Abraham Accords. And if you look at each of them, they both illustrate a geographical unit, maybe a political unit, or what we would normally think of as a national entity. So for example, if we take the last one, United Nations offices in New York, it becomes very clear that it's both United Nations and relating to the New York office. Similarly with the Ryukyus, it defines clearly that it's the period of the United Nations administration. British Mandate, again, we define the period and the place. Now, the time period. It's very easy to just throw in a beginning date and an end date, but these dates should actually relate to the subject that you're showing. It should represent either a specific point in time that relates to your subject, either at the beginning or at the end. It should not just be the earliest and the latest items that you show, because the earliest and latest items don't really mean anything in respect to the subject. They're simply what you have available. And obviously those dates, the items that you show, ideally, the dates of the material should be as concordant with the dates that you define for the time period of your exhibit. So for example, the US first issues of 1847, the first general issues, ideally, you should try and show, if you're showing the postal history, show some covers in 1847. Just as one specific example. So your time period should be relevant to the subject and not just the earliest and latest dates of the items that you show. Now, again, taking the countries relating to the AAPE show, we can talk about start dates for administration, the end dates of the different administrations. In terms of the Arabian Gulf countries, this would translate into the periods of the Indian Postal Administration, the short-lived Pakistan Postal Administration, the British Postal Administration, and then obviously and importantly, the Independent Postal Administration. In terms of Palestine, we'd be looking obviously at the Ottoman period, the Foreign Offices, the British Mandate, and ultimately the State of Israel. Now, taking some specific traditional exhibit titles, we would be looking at some of these examples. And again, I've chosen examples relating to the different countries of the AAPE show. So as you look down the list, you can see you have a defined geographical scope. You have clearly defined time periods relating to the issue. And also it implies whether it relates to one stamp issue or to a stamp issue and its derivatives. So for example, if we take the Palestine blues, it not only relates to the basic blue stamps, but also to their surcharges. Again, the 1961 Trucial States definitive issue, for those who are familiar with it, it's one series of stamps. It's a fairly short-lived issue, mostly used in Dubai. and actually philatelically a very, very interesting one to study and a great one for a one-frame exhibit. The United States 1869 issue is obviously a much broader topic. You have the values from the 1 cent to the 90 cent. And one from this title would assume that all values would be represented in that exhibit. Obviously not suitable for a one frame. Again, for the collectors from Israel, they're very familiar with the many exhibits of the Dor Ivri issue. And again, the title very clearly defines what the judges should expect. Now, in terms of philatelic characteristics, I said that I would try and kind of shed some light on what that really means. Well, it should indicate roughly the class for which the exhibit has been submitted. Obviously, the judges have the class numbers and everything else, but sometimes exhibits are entered in the wrong class. So the title should at least give the judges some indication as to whether the exhibit is in the right class. The title of the exhibit should also be relevant to its scope. The title should give some indication of the treatment used in the exhibit. Now, all of you, I'm sure, have heard the word treatment over and over and over till you're sick of hearing about it. But it is, fortunately or unfortunately, probably the most important aspect of both exhibiting and judging. And those of you who were on the critique on Sunday will have heard all of the judges talk a lot about treatment. Its importance cannot be underestimated. Now, in terms of a postal history exhibit, title and treatment, is the exhibit arranged by postal markings? Is it arranged by postal rates and routes? Is it a discussion of postal services, or is it a combination of those different categories? If we're looking at a traditional exhibit, the title should ideally clarify if we are going to include forerunners, items prior to the period, the primary focus of the exhibit. Are we going to see pre-production proof and archival material, errors, varieties, and misprints? Or are we going to also include usage of the relevant issues? Now, if we look at postal history exhibits, here are some recent titles that have been used at different shows. Again, the last one will be familiar to you from the AAPE exhibition. The other ones from other recent international events. When I say recent, I mean pre-COVID. And as you can see, they all define period, place, and the details about what is to be expected in the exhibit. Now, if we look at traditional exhibits, again, here are 4 examples, none from the recent AAPE, but they again clearly define the content of the exhibit. And these are kind of role models that one should consider in preparing the title for your exhibit. Now, in terms of you, the exhibitor's exhibit, let me say, first of all, there is no single correct title for any exhibit. You can express the title in different ways. The key thing is to allowing people to understand the exhibit. You also can, over time, change the title of your exhibits. Many exhibits are shown under a changed title. This is not an infrequent thing. I would strongly recommend that you avoid kitschy and humorous titles. At one stage, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was a craze for making kitschy titles. And it was great for a while, but really the novelty wore off, and really it wasn't very helpful to the judges. And again, I reiterate, my wife says I always repeat myself, and today I am certainly going to repeat myself. The title emphasizes what the exhibit includes and or what it excludes. Now, taking the English language, we have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how we express the title. And I take 2 examples here. The first one, the title of the exhibit is broken into 2 parts using a colon. In the second case, the title is broken into two parts using a second line, a major heading of the Turkish post in the Holy Land, and a subheading of routes, rates, and postmarks. Both of these styles are helpful ways of developing a title that is easy to follow and explain what the exhibit is about. They're just two examples, and obviously, you know, different exhibitors would address the matter in different ways. Now, doubling back for 1 second, I said that really I was not going to say much about thematic or display class exhibits or some of those other categories. Well, the bottom line is that basically, roughly the same principles apply. If you're going to show a thematic exhibit, it needs to very clearly, the title needs to very clearly define what the exhibit is about. It has to be very, very clear to the judges what they should expect. So also with display class exhibits, social philately, and also for picture postcards. Those of you who were able to look at Tim Bartschy's or listen to Tim Bartschy's presentation on collecting and exhibiting picture postcards that was done during the show will understand that the title for a postcard exhibit is also very, very important. Now, drawing things to a summary, a poor title is not related or poorly related to the content of the exhibit. A good title concisely and accurately describes the content and scope of the exhibit subject. What I'm saying is not new. It's certainly not new. Back in 1989, the late Bill Bauer, who was one of the prominent US national and international judges, said what is shown on the screen about the title. Ellie, you probably remember Bill Bauer. I'm sure you at some point must have judged with him. And he says it very well. The title must accomplish several things. Set the scene for the exhibit, define the subject to be covered, define the scope of the exhibit, and outline the logical arrangement that will be followed. I couldn't have said it any better than he did back in 1989. The principles haven't changed. Now, a practical matter, presenting the title on the title page. Now, these may seem like kind of very basic points, but they're important. The title's got to be large enough and legible enough to be read. The title should not be repeated on each and every page of the exhibit. Some exhibitors do, they think it's helpful. It really just wastes space and takes a lot of typing. Individual pages, however, should include chapter headings, subheadings, or item headings. You don't need to repeat the title of the exhibit. Another piece of advice, and people may agree or disagree with this, but I would recommend avoiding bilingual or multilingual titles for an exhibit. Just keep it simple, keep it in one language. Don't try to repeat the title of the exhibit in different languages. It doesn't help, it doesn't make any difference, and it's certainly not going to raise your medal level. Now, turning to the title page itself, this is a much easier aspect, I think, than the title itself. These are basically the different pieces of information that should or should not be on your title page, the first page of your exhibit. The most important thing, and this kind of substantiates the title of the exhibit, the statement of purpose. What is the exhibit showing and its coverage? Additionally, you want to clarify the type of the exhibit. You also want to plan, a clear plan, a roadmap to the exhibit. You also want to define clearly the scope of the exhibit, the beginning, the middle, and the end. If necessary, you should explain how to interpret the presentation. If you have adopted a new approach to a postal history subject, if you have adopted an unconventional approach, an unconventional treatment, it is very helpful to explain that treatment for the judges, because otherwise your novel approach may confuse or simply be misunderstood by the judges. Final comment, final piece of advice: avoid long background narratives. Long background personal experiences, goals, ambitions, driving ambitions. Really, you don't need all that. It's not helpful. It doesn't enhance the exhibit. If you have some short, relevant historical details that you want to share, they could be personal, they could be generic, they could relate to the subject. Make them short, brief, and to the point. Now, obviously, again, you're all familiar with the typical point scores for exhibit evaluation. What you should do on your title page is tick these different boxes. Make sure you've addressed treatment, the importance of the subject, your knowledge, your personal study. Again, let's just clarify that again. Explain your choice of treatment. Explain the importance of the exhibit, both from a global perspective and for the region. Second only to treatment, importance is one of the most, should we say, talked about aspects of an exhibit. We talked about it at length on Sunday. Importance both for the subject from a global perspective and also from the region. Some judges do interpret importance slightly differently. So the more that you can do to justify importance on these two aspects, globally and regionally, the more you're going to help your exhibit. You also want to demonstrate your knowledge. Now, your knowledge could be personal research, as I talk about in the next category, or it can be how you apply generally accepted knowledge of the subject. Obviously, the judges are looking both for your knowledge and your research, as well as your experience and your ability to apply the knowledge and research of others. Very few exhibits exclusively contain personal knowledge and research. Almost every exhibit incorporates knowledge and research derived from the work of others. But it's important to show how you apply that information and how you bring it into your exhibit. Naturally, you can address the challenge factor. How difficult is it to replicate your exhibit? You can designate some of the key items in your exhibit. And lastly, and probably one of the most underrated things, is make sure your presentation is neat and attractive. Personally, I hate doing exhibits, making them neat and attractive. I just don't have an eye for it. But it does significantly influence the thinking of the judges. Now, there are various other questions that relate to title pages. And again, there is no one single answer to some of these questions. Should you include a philatelic item? Well, if you looked at the exhibits in the AAPE show, in one case there was a postcard. In other cases, there were philatelic items. In other cases, there was nothing. Should you include a map or an illustration? There's no real one answer to those questions. Again, it's a personal judgment. How much space do you have on the title page? Do you have room for an item? It's more important to get the written words than to include an item. If you're struggling to fill the page, then maybe you include an item, maybe you include a map. But again, the map or illustration or the item needs to be relevant, and it needs to be directly related to the scope of the exhibit. Now, a couple of other things that you need to include: a bibliography. I misspoke there, a bibliography. Some of the major works that you have used, some of the major milestone works on the subject that you're showing. A timeline is also sometimes helpful, especially in terms of a postal history exhibit. Now, another related question is, what about outline and introductory remarks elsewhere in the exhibit? Well, within the exhibit, there are going to be subchapters and subsections. You can certainly include brief outlines and brief introductory remarks at the start of those subsections within the exhibit. So not everything necessarily has to be crammed into your title page. Where you have clearly demarcated sections in the exhibit, you can move some of those outline and introductory remarks to the beginning of those sections. The title page also should explain which items have been expertized, and you should also explain how you are highlighting key items in your exhibit. If you don't explain these 2 points, it may be confusing to the judges, or the judges may overlook some of the information. Again, there's no necessarily single best way to mark the items that have been expertized. There's also not a single best way to highlight key items. Different people have done it in different ways. Choose a way that is helpful and attractive. So, summarizing, features of a good title page. This one may be a little controversial, but you should always think of the public as well as the judges. There are 2 audiences, the public and the judges. Your good title page should be relevant. It should be factual. The information should be factual. It should be objective. You're not necessarily there to exaggerate the material that you have. Be objective, be realistic about it. You also want to be brief, and you also want to be readable. Long, convoluted sentences are not helpful to the judges or to the public. Express yourself simply. Make your sentences short and clear. Now, a couple of other basic points. Do not highlight on your title page what you do not show. The judges don't need to be told that you don't have the 10 best items on the subject that you're exhibiting. Now, a couple of other thoughts. The title page ideally should be the first page that you prepare. But most importantly, it should be the last page which you edit. That is to say, you draft your first page, you work on it, you make sure you're happy with it, and then you apply what you have written on your title page to your exhibit. And then, after you have completed your exhibit, you should then go back to your title page and ensure that your title page still represents what you show in your exhibit. Now, what may seem a really basic point, it's really important whenever you can to submit a copy of your title page with your application form. Most times, the title pages go to the judges before the show. It does allow the judges to start preparing. And again, I reiterate, the title page will help the judges evaluate your exhibit. This is to your benefit. It's not necessarily to the benefit of the judges creating work for them, but it allows them to start to prepare to do the evaluation of your exhibit. Now, a couple of useful references in terms of title pages and titles of exhibits. The American Philatelic Society Manual of Philatelic Judging and Exhibiting includes a lot of information on these topics. And this is a little confusing because obviously we have AAPE 2021, which is the Abraham Accords Philatelic Exhibition of 2021. But the American Association of Philatelic Exhibitors, also called AAPE, they have on their website, aape.org, they actually have examples of award-winning title pages. And I'd encourage you all to take a look at some of those title pages and see how some of those ideas could be applied to your title page for your exhibit. And that more or less brings us through the presentation. Yoram, I don't know, should we, I'm sure people may have comments, criticisms, questions. I don't know quite how we best do that.
I guess I need first to unmute people. What happened? Yeah?
I stopped screen sharing. I don't know if that messed you up.
Oh, okay. Okay, I don't know how to unmute everybody. So anyone, please unmute yourselves. I guess it's only you can do that. Okay, you people. And thank you, Colin. Anyone wants to ask a question is welcome to do that.
I should say one thing. If I cited the title of your exhibit, please do not take it as a personal criticism. It was just intended to illustrate the points that I was saying. Either everybody's asleep or they... Oh, Moishe has a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
On a postal history exhibition, how can you give some guidelines about what kind of a plan would you expect to see in this kind of exhibition? Should it be the sub periods in the main period the exhibition dealt with, or what kind of can you elaborate a little about this?
Okay, I can tell you what it shouldn't be, and then I can say a little bit about some alternatives. It should not, in almost every case. Hi, Aldo. Good morning. In almost every case. Hi, Aldo. How are you? To address your question, Moishe, in almost every case, it should not be chronological. Most postal history in a meaningful way does not happen chronologically. You should try to look at how, going back to that one slide that I showed, for example, rates, routes, or postal services. And there is, again, no single answer. I mean, obviously, if you take the Ottoman period of Palestine as an example, you can address the different types of markings and how those changed throughout time, how the different markings were used in certain periods and how they evolved. You can address different types of mail. For example, there was the exhibit on the printed matter rates. Almost any approach not chronological. You can look at maritime aspects. You can look at how, as a different type, how the postal service expanded through the opening of new offices. If you took, for example, the 1847 issue of the United States, the first general issue, you can look at how those stamps were used on the railroads, how the use of the stamps involved with the railroads, how the use of those stamps involved in use of the waterways, the use of those stamps on international mail, the use of those stamps on domestic mail as more post offices were opened up within the country. So you can see how the use of the stamps diffused across the country. I mean, there are lots of different ways, but the main thing is to avoid a simple chronological treatment because it's really kind of meaningless. And as a result, the exhibit jumps around from different aspects of the Postal Service. So, I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this, Moshe, on Sunday. Ed Croft made the comment that for the Palestine, the Ottoman Palestine, you essentially had two exhibits kind of stuck together. You had a chronological exhibit in the first, say, 6 frames. Then you had a frame of the Jewish settlements. And then there was kind of a wartime frame where, you know, kind of you had the war period, the military aspect. That first chronological part should really get restructured to be based on either the markings, the development of the markings, or the development of the Postal Service, and or rates and routes. And it can be a combination of markings, rates, routes, and services. Probably the latter, the combination, which is the subheading of that exhibit. So in fact, if you go to the subheading of that exhibit, the second line, that's really how that exhibit could best be structured. Does that answer your question, Moshe?
Quite well.
Very directly, very directly.
Yes, and sure, of course, this was the exhibition on the table right now in my idea. But again, okay, I'll have some thinking to do, and I think it's not the last time we're going to talk about it.
I'm sure not.
I hope
I'm
so,
sure,
at least.
I'm sure not.
Thank you.
All right, other questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Some things you mentioned that could or should be done on the title page. For
Okay.
example, highlighting key issues and so on. Aren't they better or more suited for a synopsis page, which the jury sees but not the general public?
Not necessarily, because if the general public is also looking at the exhibit, the attention span of the general public is often shorter. So if you can say, these are the key items in the exhibit. The other aspect is, many times the synopsis pages don't necessarily end up in the judge's hands. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so it's better, I mean, you can mention it in the synopsis too, but I think it doesn't take up a lot of room on the title page. And I think it is helpful to reiterate it or to emphasize it there. It doesn't take up a lot of space, and it helps the public as well as the jury.
Okay, well, I guess everybody looks at the world from his point of view, and of course mine is from the thematic world, where the plan is far more detailed and there's a shorter space on the title page.
Well,
There's a lot of
oftentimes,
things I put in synopsis because I want the jury to know, but I don't have the space for it on the title page.
well, let me throw you back a question, Yoram.
Sure.
How do you feel about on thematics where you have essentially two title pages, the first page and the second page, of which the second page is the plan? I mean, I say tradition, in the past, decades ago, you saw many thematic exhibits, and in America, many topical exhibits, where you essentially had two title pages. You had a traditional title page or a conventional title page, and then you had a second page that went through the plan. How do you feel about that?
I think today, especially if you have 5 frames and not 8, if you devote 2 pages for things like that, it is viewed as if you don't have enough material to show and you're just trying to, to pad it over 2 pages. I haven't seen many that do that in recent years.
Yeah.
Almost everybody in thematics is using one title page.
Well, the old timers had some pretty good ideas. And, if you've got 8 frames, if you can lay a better foundation, maybe that page wasted is not such a bad thing. But as I say, I'm not a thematic judge. So, and unfortunately, we don't have Menachem with us today. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. I'm sure he would have something to say on that.
Well, we have Dr. Feivel here, is an experienced exhibitor and is also a thematic judge. And I remember hearing from him 20 years ago that his personal opinion is that it's best to have 1 page, not 2. In the AAPE exhibition, we had a thematic exhibitor who had 2 different pages, but his pages were wider than the normal A4, so he actually gave it 2 out of 96 pages.
Right.
And it did look a little too much, I guess. That's personal opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the points which I would reiterate and this is something which I said, there is no single answer. There is no, this is not a multiple choice thing where there is one right answer. It's partly stylistic. It's partly what you as an exhibitor want to do. I mean, obviously you want to present yourself in the best possible light, but there is no one right answer. And that applies both to the title page and to the title of the exhibit itself. Ellie,
Yes.
Ellie,
Yeah.
what do you have to say?
Two things. One, first a question, and then a short story.
Okay.
The question is, how do you feel towards the advice and help of experts, professionals, or judges in choosing the page, the title page, and in writing the exhibition? I'll talk about two people who unfortunately are not with us, and I won't offend them. One of them is Luis Alamani of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
His work was awful. His pages were awful. All of a sudden, he went to an expert. He redone his collection, and all the explanations were fantastic and everything. And the other one is Wille from Switzerland, who also went to Till Neumann, and Till Neumann redone his exhibit, and it became fantastic. How do we judge, or how do we feel about the help of the experts and the professionals? And then a short story, but please, first question.
Well, again, there's no right and wrong answer. In certain cases, people don't have the computer skills. You know, some people just, they physically don't know how to do it. I kind of fit almost in that category. I'm not very good with computers and things. Certain people have disabilities. Certain people have, you know, if you have a collector who might have had a stroke or something, and they physically can't do it. Do I think it's a good thing? Ideally, in a perfect world, everybody would do their own. The reality is, it's never going to happen. There are always going to be people who can afford or who choose to use a subcontractor. If you want your apartment painted, you're going to get a painter in to do it. I think in terms of, this is going to be controversial. This will be controversial. In terms of the metal level, who cares? You know, if the material is really fantastic and it really deserves a large gold and it gets a large gold just because a hired hand stuck the stamps on the pages and did the pages, who cares? If you're looking at the choice of a Grand Prix, subconsciously, it might be a factor to take into account. If you are looking at an apple and an orange, you know, the apple was polished by a professional. The orange came straight off the tree. Maybe the orange straight off the tree is more deserving than the apple that's been polished by the professional and put on the shelf. So I think, again, there's no right and wrong answer. I think a jury has to be sympathetic to the circumstances. And at the end of the day, they also, and this is, I think, something that you and I both agree on, you have to look at the material. You know, yes, the packaging is important. The packaging is important.
Right.
But you know what? When you open the box of chocolates, you want them to be tasty, delicious, and you want to eat more. If you open the box and they're all white and tired looking, and you throw it in the garbage, you know, no matter how pretty the box looks, what's inside the box is more important. Material, material, material. Now that's a whole other topic. But I mean, that's a very long-winded roundabout way of dodging your question.
A short story. I made once a mistake. Not only one, but once for sure. A collector came to me in Jerusalem. I was not in the jury. I was just president of the show, not in the jury. And he asked me how to do my first page, what to do, how to improve, what to do. And I gave him some advices. I was after the seminar of the jurors, and I was in good form. And I told him, do that, and do that. And this guy, after 2 weeks, wrote to all the jury in the next exhibition, Weber told me to do this and this and this. Is he right? What do I do? I was mad. And the jurors wrote to me what to do with this guy. And the guy is a collector of a large gold collection, not a bronze. So my advice to jurors, never give any advices about title page or how to write the exhibit. Be careful, because don't give any advices. Jurors, please don't give advices. That's it. That is.
On the other hand, how does the exhibitor learn?
I think Eli wants to say, don't give specific advices,
Right.
just more general terms.
Right, you
Well,
are. Thank you. Right, you are.
So Eli, did I put my foot in it?
No, you're right. You are clever.
Okay, I think we have another question. Is the sign of the hand, is that a asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi, Nada.
Colin.
Hi,
Yes.
Nada.
Hi. Please, question now. Let's say in general, when you talk about, let's say, the Ottomans' cancellations, okay, or postal history in Palestine, just for example, okay, for post offices, let's say in Gaza, in Jaffa, and Nablus, and Jerusalem, okay, if we talk about the chronological development of each sub-post office, let's say each sub-post office might take maybe 10 years for certain cancellations. Shall we keep just talking about these cancellations in these sub-post offices, or I shall follow the chronological dates for the entire post offices? I mean, I can jump from in the same year, let's say in 1917, whatever in Gaza, Nablus, Jerusalem, or Jaffa, then 1918, then 1919. Or I just keep talking about certain sub-post offices until clear it, then I jump to the other post office.
Well, for example, most post, and again, this is general rather than,
yes,
most postal markings overlap with other markings. And generally speaking, say if you take the Ottoman, boxed, circular, different styles of circular, bilingual.
Negative seal, yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, the key thing is not so much the more important thing is the different types of marking, the characteristics of those markings. So say you're doing a sub-office, show the box types, negative seals, and then the circular types, you know, the bilingual type, but show them grouped by marking type. Don't show them chronological. So you don't say go, you know, a box type, then a circular, then a negative seal, back to a box type. Because really the chronological, I mean, and this is a very general comment. Most postal history does not happen chronologically. The use of the markings does not happen chronologically. You've got all these, if you look at, for example, the Muscat exhibit, and this is a good example. Eli, I'm treading on dangerous ground because I'm moving to a specific. But if you look at that exhibit, you have so many things going on all at once. And that is one of the when you focus on chronology, you've got all these different things going on at once. And what you want to do is you want to simplify the story to, in a sense, think of it as boxes on the table, and you put things in boxes, and you want to move from box to box to box. You want a simple, easy to follow thread to the story. If you have a story with so many things going on, if you have, you know, if you have a story that's weaved like a carpet, it's really hard to tease out the story. You want to be able to follow it simply and logically. And if that means leaving details out, you leave out certain details in order to make the story easy to follow.
Okay.
That's an
Okay.
unspecific answer to a specific question.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and for the picture postcard, let's say for the title page, it differs than the postal history or traditional?
No, it
Entirely?
follows this. It follows the same basic concepts.
Okay.
Yoram?
Yeah.
Could you email Nada, how can Nada access Tim's presentation when the show website comes down?
Well, the show website will still be on for at least 3 months.
Oh, really? Okay.
So
Okay.
it's
So
accessible.
Nada, you should go look at Tim's presentation. I think it comes under events. Is that right?
It's under events, and then there's a page for Tim's presentation.
Sorry, where
I
can I
think-
find this one?
So
If
go
you go
to
to the show. Oh, sorry, Yoram.
go
You're
to
on
the
mute.
show website aape2021.com, and then go to events, and you'll
Okay.
see Tim's presentation there.
What's the name of the exhibitor or?
It's under events. There are only 2 events. There's the opening ceremony, and the second one is Tim Barchi's presentation about picture postcards.
Okay, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else? So many people here without cameras. I can't see.
Okay, so another question, Colin, please. In the title page, let's say for postal history, is it
Okay.
preferable to put map, okay, in the title page, like for the routes or for the main routes that have been used in this presentation, let's say, or it's not necessarily?
It's not necessary. If for some reason a map would help define the scope and nature and aspect of the exhibit, yes, but in most cases the map will be more relevant to individual items shown through the exhibit. Most cases, and again, this is a broad answer to a specific question. In most cases, a generalized map on the title page doesn't really say very much. What would be more helpful is to have the map showing the individual mail routes, if assuming the emphasis is on routes, of the individual cover on the page. If it's a question of the post offices, say you have a section that starts with post offices in Iraq. So you have a section on offices as opposed to rates and routes. So you're showing how the different offices opened over time. You could show a map at the beginning of that section saying, in this date, there were 3 post offices in Iraq. 10 years later, there were 10 post offices, and you highlight them. And then 20 years later, there were 50 post offices. And you can do it like a diffusion model where you show how these offices opened. And you could do it with, the 3 offices and then the sequence. But again, that map relates to a specific thing, i.e., how the country opened up in terms of the opening of offices. And that map wouldn't be very helpful on the title page, because if you say you're dealing with offices, rates, routes, and military, that map should be with the section talking about the offices. Is that what your question, or have I misunderstood the question?
Yes, okay. So I can use maps better than in subsections.
Absolutely. They're very helpful in subsections.
Okay, and there is no limitation in using maps in subsections. Like I can use 2, 3, 4 maps in each frame, for example.
No. Not too many.
If the maps start to dominate,
Yeah.
then you might want to think about whether you are overemphasizing the maps. The other thing which I would say about the maps, people have a tendency to scan a very complicated map showing borders and towns and names and blah, 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 blah. A simple, almost line drawing map is much better. It shows only the information that's relevant to the item that's being shown. Don't just go to Google Maps and scan some big complicated map that's got piles of information that you don't need. Draw your own simple little map to show the relevant details. And I think that's that applies throughout an exhibit. You know, don't make maps and plans overcomplicated. Ellie's
Okay.
nodding. So Ellie's nodding. So that.
And not too many maps, not too many, 2, 3, no more.
Yes, yes, clear, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
We have another question.
First of all, Colin, thank you for this wonderful presentation. We really enjoyed it, and greetings to all of you here. Greetings from Honduras. My question is regarding that comment that you made regarding not putting a title in a second language. Can you go a little bit further into that? I'm asking, for example, in the case that I as an exhibitor, I'm presenting my collection in a place where my native language will not be the dominant language in that area. Just for me to maybe give a little bit more of information to the jury and maybe to the public, I would like to have maybe a title, maybe in smaller print, but in a different language. Not all the pages, of course, but maybe some things in 2 languages just to explain things a little bit better. But I would like you to go a little bit deep into that, please.
Again, there's not necessarily a hard and fast answer to this, but you might find it more helpful, assuming your exhibit is fully written up in Spanish, for example.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Given that you might be, if you're showing it at a national show in South or Central America, the title in Spanish is great.
Yeah.
But for a more, if you are showing at an international exhibition, given that many of the people at the show, a number of the judges are not necessarily as fluent in Spanish, but more of them might be fluent in English, having the title in English might be more helpful to a broader range of jurors.
Yeah.
What you can do, assuming the show asks you to submit a synopsis, you could always do 2 versions of a synopsis. Aldo might have an opinion on it. You could always do 2 versions of a synopsis in English and a synopsis in Spanish.
Okay, yeah.
And that way you are making the information more readily accessible to a broader range of the jury. I think having the title in 2 languages, I just think oftentimes can be confusing. Aldo may have an opinion about doing a synopsis in English and a synopsis in Spanish. Yoram, can you Aldo unmuted. Aldo, how do you feel about doing 2 synopses?
2 synopses in 2 languages?
Yeah, one in English and one in Spanish.
Not necessary. I feel only one in English. If we are talking about FIP exhibitions, it's not necessary to have two synopses.
But you would do it in English? You would do it in English rather than Spanish?
I can judge in English.
There, I think you have the answer from Aldo.
Okay.
The point here is that we have to see the area where you are judging. I always think as FIP jury. I never think as continental jury, but sometimes in Latin America, they need or they prefer to have the synopsis and all information in Spanish, and we cannot say no, because also Spanish is one of the official languages of FIP.
Yes.
Nevertheless, at least at FIP exhibitions, the title page and all the important information regarding to the exhibit should be done in English, because the judges do not understand usually do not understand other languages. That's a problem.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I mean, for me to say, oh, it should all be in English sounds terrible. But, you know, certainly from my personal experience, having everything in English is much easier. But to hear you say that it should be in English as a Spanish speaker, I think you've answered the question very, very well.
You should remember that at FIP, as far as I understand, the introductory page should be done in English, and all the other pages can be done in a different language. Okay, that's also allowed, but it's not preferred, but it's allowed. So in the Latins usually prefer to put it in Spanish, and as they say, Spanish is also the official language. Also, the Spaniards do the same thing.
Did we answer your question?
Yes, and thank you very much. Gracias, Aldo.
Gracias, Aldo.
Okay,
And
any
thanks,
other
Colin, also.
questions? Any other questions? Okay, so want to thank Colin for his presentation and for heading the jury of our exhibition. And I want to thank you all for attending. Let's hope we'll meet soon in a real exhibition face to face. Okay, so thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Yoram, very much. And thank you
Bye-bye.
all for attending. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Shalom lechem.
Bye.
Shalom. Shalom,
Bye.
shalom.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Shalom, shalom.